good or bad.
Sorry, forgot to hit record. John, I appreciate what you're saying. And actually, I think like as I get older, I realize that time is often, and granted, right, like I'm solidly in an economic class where I can say this, like time is more valuable to me than money. Sometimes. And I will tell you, one of the things that's been frustrating with the Episcopal Church, and this is true, right, is that we realize that actually, like, if we send money to Haiti or to, like, Gulf Shores after a hurricane, that can be better spent by people on the ground than us spending a lot of money to get there and doing this volunteer thing, right? So in general, my experience with the Episcopal Church is like, send your money, it's the most efficient. But you've probably heard me say this before, that doesn't build relationships, and it doesn't build like an ambassadorship either. And I will tell you, people will give less money when it's just money, but when it's commodities or time and relationships, people will give more. I know this is true, right? And so, like, how is it that we do kind of both things? And having done Habitat International, I took a group of kids to China. And sure, like we were tourists, and we helped dig a foundation. And sure, we spent a lot of money getting kids there that could have done more work. But the kids weren't going to give that money unless they went, A. B, going gave them an experience with other people they otherwise would never meet. And the thing that Habitat did that was really cool is you paid to go, and you also had to make a donation to the local affiliate. It's like included in the price was a donation that the local group was not going to get if you didn't go. And you had a story, and you had time on the ground. Like, it seemed like the best of both worlds. And we didn't call it a mission trip. I mean, we called it mission tourism. And that seemed right. I'm a big believer in mission tourism. If we just call it what it is, you know. I think that comes back to the neighbor thing, right? Like, we can be really selective, and social media even helps. Like, if you don't like what somebody thinks, you just unfriend them. Like, it's super easy. But like, when you go somewhere and you're demographically locked in, you have to contend with the demographics. Or move, like, those are your choices. But I see that we live in, like, well, I'll just talk about the neighborhood I live in, which I like, but it's a relatively homogenous community, if I'm honest about it. Mm-hmm. Now, people believe all kinds of different things, but in general, economically, we're pretty similar. Education, I think we're probably pretty similar. Most of us are like white folk. And like, I don't think that's intentional. I just think that's where we live. And it's like, there's a natural gravity to that stuff. Like, people say, well, I hate that there's, not more Black folk that come to St. Thomas. Well, do you want to be one of 4 Black people? Would you like to go to an all Black church and be 1 or 2 white folk in the church? I don't know if you'd want to do that. You can. Mm-hmm. I can tell you a lot of places you could do that. And so, like, I don't know, instead of saying like, hey, like, people do this intentionally, I think there's a whole lot of reflection even in these scriptures that, like, there's like natural gravity to these systems, and like, what does resistance look like? Or what does complicity look like? And I love what you said, John, about like, hey, like, I don't always know how to do that. I don't always know that I can go, or that I will go, or I've got time, so something's better than nothing, or something's what I choose to do. And, I always get nervous when people say like, hey, here's the way you have to help. Because there's a lot of ways that we can be involved. I do like that we collect food at Thanksgiving instead of just money. I like that, because you have to actively like buy ingredients. And that's like a physical thing you do, which is going to physically go to other people. Increasingly, like, you all get this, my grandfather only carried cash. and like money is kind of meaningless now. Like it's a bunch of like numbers and some kind of data system, like cash is this rare treat that I choose not to carry around. Because if I lose it, it's gone. Like money's increasingly like theoretical in my own experience. It used to be real tangible when I was a kid, right? But now it's all electronic. Maybe that was a weird thing to say.
Well, and I would say, John, that you're not as hands off as you indicate that you just give money, because think about our food bank distribution. You're there. It's not like going on a mission trip or to another country or something. And some people think you're not being compassionate if you don't do the big, huge thing. But we interact with these people and we accept them without judgment. So I think you do both.
Yeah, I think very good point, Ellen. I think we lament what we don't do, but we forget what we do. I mean, John, you've done a number of different things in the church, but this whole business with the organ is not just money; it's your time and your energy. So we forget what we do sometimes. But sort of speaking of being changing.
Thank you.
I don't know if y'all are reading the Houston Chronicle, kind of the investigative reporting on parsonages paying property taxes, but they found numerous large parsonages across Texas where they pay no property taxes, even if they don't meet the guideline, the state law on because it's limited to 1 acre, and some of them are very large. And so they asked this one pastor about it, and he goes, "Well, Jesus was rich." And I'm thinking,
really?
Where did you learn that? And because I can't think of one piece of property Jesus had other than the shirt on his back. And I'm reminded by when Jesus sends out the disciples in Luke 10:4, he says, "Do not take purse or bag or sandals." I mean, they literally had nothing but the shirt on their back, if you will. And not even sandals. That was too much property to have. So, these were austere people who preached the gospel. So I found that interesting.
Yeah, and of course, that's where you get like the rule of Benedict, and our Catholic brothers and sisters theoretically take vows of poverty. This was part of the problem that led to the Reformations, right? Is that like clergy lived like princes, right? Particularly when they were bishops, and they ultimately controlled land and income that were extremely lucrative. It's always this weird thing that we come to these. I don't know that you want to talk about this, but it is a weird thing that we do as clergy, and it comes up from time to time, like what does clergy compensation look like, and what should it look like, and what's like a meet and proper wage for a bishop to be paid, for lack of a better term. And it's real sticky because on the one hand, right, you can say like, well, like we've got this model of vows of poverty, and on the other hand, it's like, well, our clergy have families. And like the pension fund was started by J.P. Morgan himself. This is true because clergy were retiring with nothing. Like they were living in penury, having dedicated a career to this. So they were charity cases basically. So J.P. Morgan started this pension system that we still enjoy, that takes care of us when we retire.
For the Episcopal Church pension fund
Yeah, our pension fund is like the number 2 rated pension fund in the world.
Wow. I didn't know J.P. Morgan started that.
He did. It's an interesting story. He started it like in the early 1900s, and the pension fund is very, very well run. Apparently, just as an example, the pension fund bought eBay when it was a startup for like $100,000. And part of their rules is they can only hold like an asset for 7 years and they have to sell. So they did real well on that one. If they'd held it 5 more years, they'd have done even better, but hey, like making 1,000 times your investment, not bad, right? So like that's the pension system. And I don't know, it's interesting. I think like the hardest thing is like about it is when we don't talk about it. Like there's a lot of assumptions, and like I'll do a service for somebody and let's say like, hey, here's a gift for you. I'm like, hey, thanks. I'm going to put that in the rector's discretionary fund. They're like, well, no, I know the clergy don't, whatever. And I'm like, well, that's not my story. Like we do all right here, like and I'm fortunate that I'm married to a professional spouse, right? So like that helps. I'm not embarrassed about that. There are times where I could feel really bad about it, but I don't see how that's helpful. I mean, like we try to be pretty transparent. Like you can look at our budget. There's no question about what the clergy are getting paid. Like that's a line item, I guess I could ask for less. Well, I'm not going to. I'm just, well, I mean, I don't know if I should say, of course not. I do have a good colleague of mine who's like, you should never make more than anybody on the staff. And I'm like, I appreciate your principled living, but like I take work home that other people don't take home. That doesn't mean like I'm worth more. I don't know, like we just play different roles, and it is, I'm not at an extreme point of comfort with it, but it is something we choose not to talk about. Like in the way I grew up is like money is like a shady thing. So we don't talk about it too much in church. And, there's these scandals like you talked about with like parsonages where, every other month there's a story about how some evangelical megachurch pastor has $500 shoes and that makes them evil. And I don't know. It seems like that's a tough judgment. I mean, anyway. Luke had Jesus did have lots of money in Matthew. I mean, the Magi gave him gold and myrrh and frankincense, right? So he was sitting on these valuable, I'm kidding, right? But I mean, like, we can argue whatever we want to argue. I think probably the more important question is not like, what quantity of goods do you have? It's like, what stewardship of goods do you lean into? I guess quantity matters too, though. I don't know. John?
Okay, so I don't know quite how to coin or to ask this question, but so before Jesus is born, the Israelites are following the Torah, and some are following some of the other books of the Hebrew Bible. And Jesus is born, and he grows to adulthood, and he's teaching. And then Jesus is crucified, and he dies. And at that point, the Christian church is founded. And one of the things that we believe is that Jesus Christ is our Savior. He died for our sins. So between his birth and his death, what was Jesus? I've read all of the not all, but I've read a lot of the teachings. But what were people to believe at that point? I mean, it's kind of like there's a zone that is kind of nebulous, if you will. There's the nothing, then he's born and he lives and he teaches, and then he dies, and everybody says, okay, now. So it's sort of a question. You're smiling like you sort of understand what I'm saying. So please talk.
Well, I mean, I don't need to be the expert on this question. I'm probably not going to answer quite what you had in mind, but I would say, like, for early people, like, what to believe was like not the important question. Like the way of life was the important question. And I don't think we got to be like where cognitive belief became real important until the Nicene Creed was written and unauthorized versions of Christianity had to go underground, right? Like the first 300 years of Christianity, there were lots of ways of doing this. Lots of ways. Like some people thought the resurrection was a metaphoric event. Some people thought that instead of Jesus dying for our sin, he died because of our sin. Like that was a mistake, shouldn't have done that. And like we've had a lot of tension and there's been a lot of like sweeping of diversity into some kind of rug, such that like I still have people who are like, am I allowed to ask this question in church? Because I don't want to be disrespectful. And it's like, wow, that's really sad. That's what you've inherited, that you're afraid to ask a question that's authentic to you. So, I mean, look, did Jesus want to start a church? No, he was like a Jewish guy. And he was trying to say, I think, like, hey, the heart of our faith looks like this. So let's do that. I didn't think that even Paul was like, let's start a new religion. I mean, I think the experience of the disciples was that they somehow experienced Jesus more strongly and really and faithfully after his death than when he was alive. That might be weird to say, but like, I don't think that's a controversial claim. The disciples somehow found the experience of Jesus after his death more meaningful than even when he was alive. That can look a whole lot of ways.
Sorry. Seemed like in our readings this week, and I forgot to bring my book and my notes, so I'm having to talk off the top of my head, but it seemed like on the way to Jerusalem, you know, all along, Jesus has been teaching his disciples and others how to live differently. But as he was on his way to Jerusalem, it seemed like he was so much more intent on trying to get the disciples to understand. Maybe because he knew his time was short, but at any rate, it seems like his emphasis was on, this is what's really important. This is how you live. So that's kind of my thought there.
I appreciate it. And I can tell you as an evangelical, we were cautioned against that way of thinking because that's works-based righteousness. So, hey, works aren't going to save you. But like the earliest Christian people didn't have this concept of like an evil devil and an eternal hell. Like that wasn't their worldview. That's come since then. So like salvation was not about like, how do I get out of hell? It was like, how do I like live meaningfully this life I've got now? Somehow like we've done a lot of distancing from that. I mean, like the church I grew up in was like, life sucks, the world is terrible, but you can go to heaven when you die and that'll be really good.
Yeah, I think I was taught that too. And I think what I was kind of getting at was that what we do from the heart. A different way of life. Not that we work to earn anything here or to earn our way into heaven, but it changes the heart.
And I think if we read Luke that way, instead of some primer in what Christian folks ought to think, it's an opportunity to think about how we can more deeply live. We'll measure up real well to Luke. I just want to say that, right? Like the church I grew up in had utter disdain for people who believe the wrong things. We read books like Kingdom of the Cults so that we could hear all the wrong things that Methodists and Catholics and Mormons believe, so we could intellectually convert them into our own propositions and save them from hell because they thought the wrong thoughts. But a lot of evangelical folks I know, some of them are very, very like, they take the rule-based system of being kind very seriously, and some of them are mean. And they do it from a position of intellectual cognitive principle superiority. Like, I know I'm going to heaven and I know you're going to hell, so I can treat you like shit. They would never say it that way. It's just that that's how the behavior comes. Condescending, not respectful, right? So like I taught at a Christian school and they did teach world religions to 11th graders, but they taught how those religions were wrong and how those people were stupid for doing those things and how you could convert them. So what we taught our 11th graders were, hey, there's some merit. Like you deserve to be born an American Christian, and all of these other silly misguided people in the world, there's something wrong with them and you can go fix them if you want. Just know that they're wrong and why, instead of like, hey, the reason you're at this Christian school is because your parents are Christian. Had nothing to do with anything you earned or deserved. The reason people are Muslim is because their parents are Muslim, and so is their country. And like, it would be really cool if you could understand the benefits of that for folks. Well, that's why I think Luke calls out these people that are really, really hard to love, like in the Good Samaritan story. Like those are the hard people to love. The centurion, who's a pagan, has more faith than Jewish people does. Like Luke calls attention to that. And I think like maybe the shift for me is like, instead of us putting so much emphasis on faith, let's talk about faithfulness. What does it mean? What does it mean to be faithful? Yeah.
Is in the centurion story, is the centurion faithful to the teachings or faithful to believing in Jesus?
What does he believe in Jesus, except that Jesus can do something to help him? And you know, when you look at it, he sort of says, hey, Jesus, like, I want your help. Like, I think I'm desperate and you might be able to help, but I don't want you to be compromised by coming into my home. Because if you come in my home, you're going to be unclean for like, you're going to have to do ritual purification. So Jesus, I do want your help, but I don't want you like, you know, besmirched to give it.
Yeah, but I guess he believes something. He either he believes Jesus can help him, but that's kind of like, but I didn't hear he believes in what Jesus is teaching.
And what, he doesn't have to believe in anything. He could be just desperate. You ever been around desperate folks?
What's the story all about? Why is it in the Bible? Isn't this all about teaching?
Well,
and messaging?
So I can't say why, but what I see happening in Luke raises up these like stereotypical people. Oh, soldier bad, Roman soldier really bad. And then like Roman soldier surprisingly really good. It's almost like confronting a stereotype on our behalf. Again, like you look at the cast of characters in Luke, it's a bunch of unclean women, and Samaritans show up over and over and over again, which means whoever Luke was writing to has a problem with Samaritans, right? I mean, you know, like we don't know who the original audience was, but like a good storyteller doesn't raise irrelevant data in a story, right? So you look at the figures Luke raises up, and like, you know, they're like,
yeah,
not the good folks.
So you've got the centurion, you've got the Samaritans, and then the people that I'll use this term, maybe it's not the right one, condemns are the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the priests,
Yeah,
which are all Hebrew. So,
and rich folk too. Rich folk come out real bad in Luke.
Well, the alternative, John, would be to only show compassion to people who believe what you believe.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's not Jesus's message, right?
Not in Luke.
Yes.
Right. In Luke, Jesus goes to lengths to touch people who are unclean, which is like a, you know, it's a violation of an expression of like purity laws. And the way we say that is in evangelicals is be in the world, but not of the world. So don't like spend a lot of time around these secular folk because they'll like convert you to their wicked, evil ways.
So I'm sorry to be pursuing this like this. So what does Jesus believe, which is different from what we'll say the Hebrew belief is?
Nothing. And it would be
Okay, that makes
anti-Semitic.
sense.
It would be anti-Semitic to say otherwise. He believes in God. He believes that Adam was the child of God. That's what Luke says. He believes that all of Adam's progeny are children of God, which means we're all in the same family and we all live on the plane, not on some kind of hierarchalized thing, right? He believes that women are human beings.
Well, if he believes one thing different than they do, it's just that don't get bound up in the rules, show compassion.
But you know, like the Rabbi Hillel, when asked to like put all of the Torah into one, like tell us the whole Torah while standing on one foot. The message is love your neighbor as you love yourself. So he's like not a radical departure from Judaism. And the earliest Christians didn't think Jesus was doing something different. They said, aha, here's a gateway to living into what's been here all along. We're the ones who said, oh, the Jews weren't doing it right. And I think that has led to some like really scary anti-Semitic behavior. So I think it's okay to say, look, you know, Jesus helps us, is a helpful figure in us, you know, understanding like what we think the Torah was pointing us to all along. And you know, like in that way, you can have a lot of commonality with our Jewish brothers and sisters, which seems really important. I mean, what scriptures did Jesus read? What we call the Old Testament. He didn't call them the Old Testament, he called them the scriptures. The only thing unique to Jesus's ministry, I just want to be really clear, are parables. All the stuff he says, he gets it out of the scriptures. It is written. I mean, that's what he says, you know, and what he tries to do is say, like, look, you heard these words, now live into them. And this is what living into them looks like. It's not like he invalidates Judaism. I mean, I think he tries to say, like, here's the heart of faithfulness. I mean, I know Muslim people who are faithful people. Darlene, are you chiming in, please?
Yes, that was my chime.
Sorry.
This connects, what I'm thinking right now connects with what John said and what you said. John's question of, did the centurion believe in what Jesus taught or Jesus? And you pointed out in the Christian school in which you taught world religions, but it was in terms of how we can convert them and how they're wrong. There's the concept that the way, many people think that Jesus is the way. Some people think the way is what Jesus taught. And this ties in with Ellen, her thinking of it's how we live that matters. That's the way. And my guess is that when you taught the world religions, there were not only differences in what we and they think, but there are a lot of similarities. The way of living is very similar. There's a commonality throughout the world religions.
I didn't teach that class. I taught world religions at a good school.
Okay.
Not the one I was at.
I was wondering how you navigated that.
No, I got fired anyway from that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. That's a
but
good
that was
thing.
for teaching Hebrew Bible. Yeah.
Okay. I think that was a badge of honor if you got fired.
My wife said that. I got fired because I taught that Sodom and Gomorrah wasn't about homosexuality. It was about inhospitality.
Another badge of honor. Okay.
It was sad because I had a good ministry with my kids, and it was tough. What you said something though, I think that's really, really interesting, Darlene, that we so often forget when we hear that phrase from the Gospel of John, where Jesus says, "I am the way and the truth and the life." We usually think, oh, Jesus is talking about himself.
Yes.
But we forget that phrase, "I am," is a Hebrew phrase that is God's name that sounds like, like the breath that is in all living things is the way and the truth and the life. That's how the original audience would have heard that phrase, not as self-referential, but as the animating spirit as expressed in our soul, which is our breath that lives right here in our neck. And if you think about that phrase, the commonality of breath in all living things is a pretty good way.
Okay, that was mind-blowing, but I'll be thinking about that for quite a while. But also I feel like another facet of which somebody might have already spoken about, but of what I've kind of taken from this story, or the way it's been taught to me, I guess, previously at different places by different people, was that in some way, whenever we come across other Christians who don't know, quote unquote, the right forms of Christianity, and they don't have the right thoughts and beliefs and, whatever, that somehow those people are kind of more terrible than, like, say, a person who believes in a different religion than you, because they're just ignorant. They just don't know, but you do know, and you're choosing to, be horrible anyway. And especially, you're choosing to be horrible while you proclaim the name of Christ, therefore leading other people away from Christ. And it's fascinating because, I always kind of was amazed by the story of the Good Samaritan and kind of just what people took away from it, because, there's so much time, I think, spent on, good works, quote unquote, by a lot of people, and how it can't, necessarily buy your way into heaven, but also how somehow good works are like the evidence that you actually believe and think the right thing. Like if you just believe and think the right thing, automatically this good behavior will follow, which of course is a lie. I mean, you can have a lot of good thoughts, and if you have habitual behaviors that you haven't challenged and worked on in a really healthy way, so none of that is like right. But and so it ends up becoming, instead of, just like, hey, yeah, maybe you should go to counseling to, try to like observe, acknowledge, and change this troubling behavior that you have that's toxic in your life. It's suddenly like, oh, well, you don't love God enough, or you don't know the truth about God. You get all this like very like shame-based ideology about how you're just not a good person, or you don't believe the right thing, and therefore that's why your behavior can't change, or you just don't love enough, or whatever, all these like unconcrete, non-scientific feeling things that I get why people talk about, but are also just like the tip of the iceberg of something. And so it's really interesting to talk about loving your neighbor and stopping and helping someone who's in a desperate position, and the levels of judgment that we hold. Like, we're happy to go be a good Samaritan and, volunteer down at the local homeless shelter and make like PB&Js and go deliver them there, or, whatever. But whenever it comes to somebody that we know and we see every Sunday, and we know they're going through a hard time because they're getting divorced or someone died or blah, 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 we hold these other judgments about something different, because we think, well, they have Christ in their lives though, so they should XYZ, just kind of know better. Or when we see people being unkind, somehow we hold those people to a more severe standard than others outside. I don't know, I guess I'm rambling a little bit, but I find it all to be very wild because it's very non-logical,
But
And
Amber, I want to hop on and say, like, I think sadly it very much resonates. Like the people I have the hardest time with are other clergy that went to seminary and they say really stupid things.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we learned not to say that in the first class we took in seminary, and here you are saying that.
Right. Yeah.
And like somehow I take that as an affront to me, which tells you I got a lot of baggage I need to deal with, right? Because like, why do I get so worked up about that? Well, because I think they ought to know better,
Hmm.
right?
And
Or
I mean, I get that. I mean, I think, like as a mom, sometimes it's hard to watch other moms doing something and you hold more severe judgments because you think, I know what it's like to care, provide care and responsibility for this other human being. And, you place all these judgments, and I do understand that. But I also think it's bizarre, I guess, to talk about and espouse the idea that, being a Christian is not about good works, and that, you cannot buy your way into heaven, which I guess Ellen, I think, said it. That's not necessarily what she was talking about, but, we've all been exposed to this idea. And then in the same token say, but if you were a good enough person, you would do all those things anyway.
well, we've had this really convoluted thing that happened in the Reformation, and it came from John Calvin, right? He says that God's grace is so precious that like some people don't get it because it would be wasted. So this is where predestination comes from. And you kind of know you're predestined if you do saintly stuff.
Well, that's gross, but okay.
Well, and of course, what it is, right, is taking something that is like mysterious
Yeah.
and trying to make it like linear and coherent.
Huh.
And this
Yeah.
is like, we've always got this discomfort in the evangelical Protestant movement about like, what role do works play? Because we don't want to say like, you have to have them, but we do want to say like, hey, if grace is in your life, you kind of have to have them. So like it's really uncomfortable, but it's kind of like where we find ourselves. And just to hold this up, like what you mentioned, you hear the Pharisees and Sadducees called out. That's because they're so similar. You don't need to call out people who are radically different. Jesus doesn't say anything about Wiccans or the Celts. It's because it's like pretty obvious they're really different, right? Like he's talking about people that are so similar, like they're almost there. And we forget that they're almost there. I mean, we read it as they're totally wrong. Like, no, you're talking to people that are so similar, like, so they can make changes. And like, you're not calling them out to bash them. You're calling them out because you trust that they can make these changes.
Well, I guess maybe another piece of it is I think it's weird to, expose someone to the idea of grace and forgiveness, I suppose. And then the second you teach them about it, tell them they should be so appreciative of it that you stop extending it anymore.
I just think we, and I'm going to say this too, as a clergy person, like I have these cool ideas about grace, but like practicing grace is really difficult.
Yeah, it is.
And churches are really tough, and like, look, I called this out on Sunday. It's still on my mind, right? Like you hear these songs about like, there's a child shivering in the cold. Let's bring him silver and gold. Like a blanket would be nice.
Yeah.
So we do this thing with this person who's born in a food trough and call him the King of Kings. And then we can say, look, we did the right thing. I mean, is Jesus really the King of Kings? Do we act like that? I mean, like, again, if you want to call Jesus the King of Kings, great, then obey him. But like we're not very obedient. And like to gild a food trough in gold is like, is it sarcasm? Like, how did we get there?
Yeah. I also think it's interesting to maybe look at the story of the Good Samaritan instead of two different people as just like two sides of yourself. And then maybe you could just be a lot kinder to everybody and starting with yourself. But
well, I think it's really helpful for Jesus to say, right? Like you do love your neighbor as you love yourself. It's not just a command, like it's the description. And maybe it's helpful just to talk about the mustard parable really fast. You probably heard me do this already, but like it's a tough parable because mustard's a weed. It's against the Torah to sow it near your crops. And the kingdom of God is like a weed that's against the Torah, and you put it purposefully in your garden. Of course, what it's going to do is take over. It's going to uproot all the plants that you want. And then it's also going to be a resting place for the birds of the air who are going to come and eat your produce. And the kingdom of God is like that.
The kingdom of God is like the rule of the mustard seed, or like the garden that you're trying to protect?
Well, I mean, like I think what Luke's trying to say is the kingdom of God's in the weeds.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right. And like what the weeds do is they harbor your natural predators. And like somehow like God's family is like that. These people that we think of as predators are like members of God's family. And the produce of our garden is meant to nourish them. And if we're thoughtful about that, hey, it may not like convert them, but even if they just poop it out, they scatter the seeds of grace wherever they go.
Yay. That's funny and awesome.
But, I mean, but I think it's actually a literal interpretation.
No, I know. I know. Yeah.
I'm
Well,
not
but I
even
mean,
trying to be creative.
I know you're not. But I think sometimes too, whenever we find ourselves that idea of like being the really conscious gardener, sometimes when we find ourselves, you know, working hard to sow seeds of whatever, and we're getting frustrated at quote unquote predators, it's because we're trying to garden against the very like cycle of nature, like the structure that God already has in place. We're saying we know better, and we're trying to, you know, like plant mango in Canada or whatever, and it's just not working out because we're doing something wrong, not because we're just a fowl of so many enemies. So I think John has something to say, so I'll stop, but yeah.
Well, I think this is exactly the kind of thinking that Luke is trying to confront us with, and that like I understand the risen Christ is not trying to make me feel good because I'm better than somebody else. Really, I think what the risen Jesus and what Luke is trying to say is like, hey, you're in the family of God. And you may not be comfortable with that, but you are. You might not feel like you earn or deserve it. Doesn't matter. It's your birthright. But it is also the birthright of everybody else. And so to deny that birthright in somebody else, or to deny that birthright in yourself, that you're a member of God's family, is just frankly not going to be a joyful way to live. I'm not trying to make Jesus into some kind of radical social prophet, but he was, because living the whole way of your life, and this is where the weed metaphor comes in again, right? Like the family of God should overtake everything in our lives. It should slowly uproot all of these other ways of tribalism, of hierarchy, of frankly things like greed and envy and malice. Should uproot those things because we'll enjoy ourselves more. But I don't think that's an anti-Jewish message. I mean, I think that's how the prophets read Judaism. I think that's how the book of Deuteronomy reads the Torah. Take care of the alien and the stranger and the widow and the orphan in your midst. The poor you'll always have with you because you're greedy. I mean, that's right out of the book of Deuteronomy. I don't know. I'm sensitive this year to how like we tend to read the Bible as this thing that happened a long time ago. And like there's these holy characters instead of the invitation to say like, where are you in the story? And I said this already on Sunday, right? But I just watched these kindergartners dress up in costumes and put on the nativity play, and it's really cute because they don't even know what they're saying. We watch it and we enjoy it, and none of us want our daughter to be the Virgin Mary. And so there's this great opportunity to think like, hey, that unwed teenage mother that's pregnant, Like, we celebrate that story. We're not supposed to judge that story. We act that out every year. But I could tell you, if it was my daughter or my cousin, I'd have a lot to deal with. I don't know if that makes sense what I'm saying. It's a core story. A girl's unwanted pregnancy is the core story this time of year. But we don't tolerate it well when we see it. It's cute when kids do it. And maybe that's our reminder, like, hey, take that cuteness and that connection to kids and apply it to unwed mothers. Okay, well, I think we've come to a good natural crescendo. You've heard everything I had to say twice. Thank you for being here. Next week, if it's okay, I'd still like to meet next week and do lesson 23. That'd be on Wednesday. I know that's the 22nd, but it's not close enough to Christmas yet. So if we could do that, I'd be really grateful. And I'll put that in the e-news too. We'll do lesson 23 next week. I'll see you then, if not before.
Thank you. See you then.